Running a business comes with a lot of what-ifs. But luckily, there's a simple answer to them. Shopify. It's the commerce platform behind millions of businesses, including Thrive Cosmetics and Momofuku. And it'll help you with everything you need. From website design and marketing to boosting sales and expanding operations, Shopify can get the job done and make your dream a reality. Turn those what-ifs into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
The Dr. Sky Experience.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
5 minutes after the hour, and thank you for joining us once again on the Dr. Sky Experience. Theater of the Mind, as we call it, theater of the mysteries around us, as we say good evening and good morning to each and every one of you, no matter where you're listening or experiencing this 2-hour program. We hope that you'll be joining us in what we call one of the main parts of conversation, in a dialogue and a conversation with our special guests about the great subjects that we focus in on, from astronomy, space, aviation, weather, American exceptionalism, and celebrities in the mix. As we move into this early Saturday morning for many of you, and still evening in other parts, you too can be part of the dialogue. Our contact number is 1-800-848-9222. That's 1-800-848-9222, which simply stands for what? WABC. Emails, we love them, and I promise to answer every one. My email is just simply drsky, D-R-S-K-Y, at WABCradio.com, of course. And to listen to podcast the archive, simply go to www.wabcradio.com or redappleaudionetworks.com. And a special thank you to Tony and Bill, our helmsmen, on our journey to the cosmos and beyond, navigating the powerful signal of 77 WABC to you, yours, across the nation, the world, and out to the vast infinite. On a note that's closer to home, happy summer solstice. That occurred for us here at 10:42 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. As the sun reaches its highest point along that ecliptic path, I need not remind you about some oppressive heat, and the heat that in some places is much more welcome than the cold of winter. Get set for some 93 days, 15 hours, and 37 minutes of summer. And from this broadcast platform in the desert Southwest and the environs of near Phoenix, Arizona, we reached a high this week of 116 degrees Fahrenheit, but many might say it's a dry heat. For the 2 hours, ladies and gentlemen, of the Dr. Sky Experience, we go and continue on the mysteries that are out there in the universe and continue to talk about and with authors that talk about the subjects of ufology. And one subject that's near and dear to my heart is the subject of something that may have happened and may not have happened, depending on your view, some 78 years ago, the Roswell incident. The Roswell incident has captured our collective imagination for decades, standing as one of the most enduring and enigmatic mysteries of modern history. In the summer of 1947, something crashed in the New Mexico desert, alleged. Initial reports suggested it was a flying disc, an assertion that sparked widespread speculation and excitement. Yet, just as quickly, the U.S. Army Air Force reversed its statement, claiming the debris was nothing more than, I quote, a weather balloon. Our very special guest is going to talk about this in great detail. Who is he? His name is Christopher Johnson. Christopher Johnson is a recognized trial attorney and certified civil trial specialist with over 2 decades of litigation experience, an 8-time recipient of the Super Lawyer Distinction and member of the $1 Million Advocates Forum. Chris has successfully argued cases before the Iowa Supreme Court and has built a reputation as a fierce advocate and legal thinker. But beyond the courtroom, Chris is a lifelong ufologist with a background in both astrobiology and space law. He has completed certificate coursework in astrobiology and earned a certificate in space law through the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs, bridging the gap between scientific inquiry and legal accountability and expanding the domain of space exploration. His book, that goes to the top of our Dr. Sky Experience bookshelf, is entitled Roswell, The Truth on Trial. The Evidence Speaks, but You Decide. And on the front cover of the book, you get an official jury summons. And with that, let us welcome to the Dr. Sky Experience, Christopher Johnston. Good morning, and how are you, sir?
Hey, good morning, good evening. I'm well. How are you?
Doing great. Just love the introduction about a subject that is so mysterious. You know, you and I have spoken a lot off air, and to get the listeners of our show engaged in the conversation. I think seriously, sir, you bring up a very unique perspective on how to bring together a courtroom trial, even though it's a fictional one in many cases, obviously. But you bring together so much about the legal system that many people, including myself, had little knowledge on. I haven't been, and maybe lucky for me, I haven't been sued by anybody. But in many cases, I don't have that, judicial experience that you do. But give us the look-see about bringing this whole case to a trial, which on the front of your book, it states that, wow, you get an official jury summons to be part of a trial about Roswell, the believers, and the deniers. Talk about the whole reality of bringing this together. I think it's fascinating.
Sure. So, as you mentioned, I'm a lifelong ufologist. I can go into depth on that later if you're interested. But right, as a trial lawyer coming up on my 25th year here, and as we get older and kids get out of the house, and you can make some a little bit more time for some of your passions and some of your hobbies. And so there are, from time to time in the legal world, you'll see a historical trial. For example, I've seen the Titanic on trial, at a seminar, and I thought, boy, what a great way, for a bunch of lawyers to get this information. And then I started thinking it's also a fantastic way to present, let's face it, we're not seeing new stuff on Roswell every day.
You're right.
It's sort of this closed universe. And people think what they think or, believe what they believe. So I thought, well, this is a whole new way to present somewhat older information. And so I'm really pleased to hear your comment about, getting some insight in the judicial system and whatnot, because that was a big goal, too, was to provide sort of that insight. And ultimately, as a juror, to provide a little guidance for critical thinking through some of these issues, rather than just clicking on a headline and going from there.
Exactly. So, no, I love what you're bringing to the table here, Christopher, because a good friend of mine, in a subject that is very much related, but not the topic of the morning here, is that he did the case for Pluto as a planet, and I thought that was interesting. A good friend of mine who is an attorney also. He came up with the idea, not exactly the way you're doing this, but there was a jury, and obviously the whole case there was about, is Pluto really rightfully a planet? And many people may be wondering out there, well, wait a minute, why did they take it away? But in this particular short hour, obviously concentrating on Roswell, the truth on trial, the evidence speaks and you decide. That's the emphasis here. Christopher, let's talk a little bit of a process that I had no knowledge of. And again, I've been on jury duty maybe once in my life so far. And many people scratch their head and say, hey, how can maybe the attorney help me to get off of jury duty? But that's not the purpose of the conversation. But you brought up a topic. I hope I pronounce it correctly. Something in the jury process selection of what goes through in these, as you're bringing a jury together to find the best. You called it what? Voir dire? Is that the correct pronunciation of it? Okay.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
People pronounce it voir dire. Once in a while I hear it voir dire, but it's a French term, the French term that means to speak the truth. And so the way it works, juries are comprised from, they'll pull, tax rolls or fishing licenses, any kind of way that you're registered with the public.
Of course.
So anyone will get a jury summons. And initially you're in the jury pool, and you're usually in the basement of the courthouse, and they'll call up, 17 of you. And then from the pool, they will call additional jurors into the box, and those jurors that are in the box, they're not jurors yet. I kind of misspoke there. So now they're in the box, and then the questioning process where the lawyers get to ask them, it depends on your judge, but you really get a lot of free rein to ask questions to try to determine who would be best suited for your trial. And so that's the voir dire process, voir dire. And then what happens, it depends on jurisdiction. Where I practice, primarily Minnesota and Iowa. The plaintiff, I'm a plaintiff attorney. I get 2 strikes. The defense gets 2 strikes, and it leaves you with a civil jury of 6 plus 1 alternate in Minnesota. That's the breakdown.
Yeah, it's interesting. No, I find this fascinating because not everybody makes it to the jury pool. But again, people may be wondering, why are we talking about the legal process? Well, it's so part and parcel to the story here. But the truth is, from the French description you gave us, the whole French word, to speak the truth. So in other words, if you really feel you're biased, what they really want you to do is say it and have some way of expressing it. That doesn't sound as if you make this up. You just have to speak the truth because you don't want jurors on any particular case that obviously don't want to be there in the basic argument here. So there you go. So let's talk about this so we get back to the meat of the whole story of Roswell, so we connect the dots. Sure. This is fascinating. So if you'd be so kind, you're the attorney, give us a summary of the case so we can hear about Roswell, so why we're here in the courtroom to make our minds up if we're selected in the jury. What would you say to the audience here?
Sure, and that would be couched in my book. I have that what's called a joint statement of the case, which is a real document, and the lawyers get together before a trial, and they put it together. And they're not, and since they're working on it together, they're not intended to be persuasive. It's just simply, hey, here's why we're all here. And you try to shove in your own good facts the best that you can. So in this case, the jurors would hear, it would be relatively bare, a little bit dry, really. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, you're here regarding an incident that happened in Chavez County, New Mexico in July of 1947. I think what the attorneys would agree on going into this is that something crashed. The great divide becomes that, was it a weather balloon or was it an extraterrestrial craft? That's what you're here to decide. You're going to hear from witnesses on both sides, and it's up to you to make the determination of whether it was extraterrestrial craft or whether it was a weather balloon or whether it was nothing at all. That's up to you, ladies and gentlemen. So that's really
absolutely.
right off the cuff, right?
No, I mean, it's very fair here, but let me go back historically. And again, I don't want you to be biased because we want people to make up their mind, but in the most explicit way that you can tell us something happened in July of 1947. And I want to bring this up to the audience and get your comment on this too, because I delve into this and been there. I've spoken there. I'm sure you have. And I was treated not necessarily so nicely by the audience, and not because I did anything wrong. I was basically trying to explain to them how to be a better sky watcher by knowing the map of the heavens. And some came up to me afterward and says, I'm not a believer. Well, how does this relate to what we're talking about? What I want to mention, Christopher, you probably know this also. July 16th, 1945. The Gadget, the first nuclear explosion on the Earth that we know of, happened in the deserts of New Mexico. It was called the Gadget. It was a plutonium bomb. But the point is, ever since then, and then after those dates, back in 1945, strange objects were seen in the skies of New Mexico and other locations. So tie that in, because what we're talking about, give us the timeline of this whole Roswell experience with some of the main players, whether you're a believer or a denier. What happened during that night when this alleged incident took place? Describe it in some detail.
Sure, certainly. Well, it's not believed that the night that it crashed, it kind of varies. It's well agreed, kind of the first week in July. But the incident is something crashed, and when it really came to light, there was a rancher by the name of Mac Brazel who was the one who first discovered the debris. So there's a little bit of debate. Did he discover it the next day, 2 days? But he discovered some debris on this ranch, which he then put in his truck for a day or two. So again, that early timeline is sketchy, but it's still within a week. He met with a neighbor lady by the name of Loretta Proctor, who encouraged him to take it to the sheriff. So all within that first week, those events occurred, and then the materials ended up at the sheriff with Mac Brazel, and he's the one that said, hey, we ought to get the military involved. So it was all within that snapshot of time, take your pick, and it doesn't make too much difference, to the overall mystery or the story itself. But that was in your first week.
Yes.
So once the military, and then this is where the mystery really took off. The military gets involved, and what do we see? We see that first press release. Hey, disc has been recovered. The next day, the statement is retracted. And, the conspiracies are off and running from that time in July 1947 until now.
And General Ramey, if I'm correct, also was part of the retraction side, I gather, from what I'm reading, right? Yes,
Ramey is the one that made the call to retract it. That's correct. And Ramey he was at Fort Worth at the time, but, he put in the call. And so, right, it was Ramey who ultimately, I believe, and research shows, was the one responsible, ultimately, tip of the spear for the retraction itself.
Exactly. Well, our special guest, ladies and gentlemen, the Dr. Sky Experience, as we open up hour number 1, as you've been listening, or if you're just joining us, Attorney Christopher Johnston. He's an interesting individual here, not because we like him because he's talking about UFOs, but he's studied this extensively, and he's bringing together in what I consider a real genius opportunity through a book called Roswell, The Truth on Trial, The Evidence Speak, You Decide, and emblazoned on the cover, you get an official jury summons so that you're sitting there in the jury pool, you're selected in this, fictional situation. What was really the events that happened? Are you a believer or denier? So I'm sure many out there in the vast radio audience of 77 WABC, if you'd like to jump in on this dialogue, it's 1-800-848-9222. That's 1-800-848-9222. Christopher is only with us to the top of the first hour. But it's fascinating because I've been there, and not as important as what you're about to say, but I was just amazed at how that whole city has really taken on new light on this whole thing. And every July, there's the biggest celebration that any town could have about this mysterious event that many believe is fact, and I'm sure some out there in the audience think it's fiction. Folks, what do you think about this? Maybe you have questions. Maybe you knew people in your life that were involved in this, maybe military members of your family that were out in this part of the United States, in the western United States, in New Mexico. And these are strange phenomenon here. It's not the only one, Christopher, that we can talk about, but this one goes deeper. So let's carry the story on from there. We get a retraction from General Ramey. The radio station I believe in Roswell and the area there reports that a flying disc has been recovered. They never said captured. Tell us more about that, because that's really bizarre stuff we're going to hear.
Right. Well, that was right, and I'm drawing a blank on the gentleman's name, but right, the news guy at the local radio station there. Sure. He had a fair amount of dealing with Walter Haut, who was the public information officer at the base, and Walter was also involved. He's the one that drafted the original press release and then the retraction. But he had gone down and met with the radio station, and if memory serves, the newsman was a little bit chafed because he didn't get the story first. And so he was talking to Walter Haut about it. Well, then the retraction came, and newsman had a follow-up conversation with Walter Haut, who allegedly Walter Haut confirmed to him, the retraction was bogus. So creating a hearsay witness, but, awfully close to the chain there.
Absolutely. The story goes deeper here. And again, I don't want to ruin the whole court case here because we don't make a decision. The jury does in this particular hypothetical story that we're talking about. But from the side of what we think we know out there, and maybe I'm more on the side of believability of this, we find out that the mortuary, a guy named Glenn Davis, they procure him to send out or deliver 4 child-sized caskets. Well, obviously, there must be something there that they're going to put inside those caskets. Carry on with that. That's bizarre, very strange, and maybe, of course, leads to the fact that something was recovered, and it's not from this world as far as a biology.
Right. And as I, discuss these questions, remember, I'm trying to kind of remain that neutral and show both sides.
Understood.
Because Glenn Dennis would be an excellent witness for either the believers or the skeptics. Mm-hmm. There are statements where he came out later and said, well, yeah, I did get a call for these caskets. Initially, it was they needed child-sized caskets that could be hermetically sealed. Well, Mr. Dennis said, well, I don't have any here. I can get some delivered, and was having them delivered, and then he went to the base anyway. It wasn't until later, this is where we run into a problem with so many of these witnesses, he started out, indicating that when he went to the base, he saw extraterrestrial bodies. Well, then when pushed on it later, and in later interviews, it was, well, I saw, kind of through the haze of this, hospital window, and then I was told that this had occurred. So again, great witness, because we all want to go, oh, look at this. He's the local mortician. He got the call for these tiny coffins.
Exactly.
And he said this. Well, yeah, well, let's back up, because the thing, testimony changes over time. And then that's where I try to point out and help the readers, be critical jurors and really focus on that. Okay, well, why is there the change? Why did that? Or, is it relevant? How much weight does it carry for you? But yeah, Glenn Dennis, on his face, very good for the believers, but an effective defense attorney, you can kind of make some hay, over some of these kind of inconsistencies.
I hear you. And just to enlighten from the legal world, the disposition, of course, the jury's decision on any particular case, civil case, is obviously what? By preponderance of the evidence. And then if we're delving into a criminal case, the jury obviously makes up a decision based on what? Beyond a reasonable doubt. And
Correct.
Some may find that rather strange to be hearing a story on the Dr. Sky experience that's not directly related to, yes, they pulled out a 42-foot UFO, put it into a truck or put it on a truck, and the bodies are definitely sent to Ohio, where they're going to be on display, and not on ice, but they're frozen. This is the great mystery, ladies and gentlemen. 1-800-848-9222. 1-800-848-9222 for conversation in a dialogue form where we talk about these things with our special guest, Christopher Johnston. His book, folks, they're really interesting. You ought to take a look at this. Roswell, The Truth on Trial, The Evidence Speaks, and You Decide, where on the front of the book it says, yeah, you get an official jury summons, and you get to partake in this from all the evidence that's presented. One of the quick things I wanted to talk about before we go to the hard break in a few minutes here at the bottom of the hour. This is interesting to me. Major Marcel, or this is something I wanted to ask you about.
Yeah.
Allegedly, there's some pieces that are supposed to have been recovered and describe them, and then later on they're told, no, they're not what we thought it was, or he said. This is really strange. So maybe there was something from that crash site recovered. Describe the story first of what might have been and what it was like.
Sure. Well, the testimony that's come out over the years is that Major Marcel said that the materials that he saw were what we hear, the foil type material that you can, bundle it up, wad it up, it goes back to its natural shape. Some very light wood, similar to balsa wood, which, can crop up later when you're doing some cross-exam. And then some hieroglyphics that he had never seen before.
Yeah,
and so that's what Major Marcel indicated that he saw. So then, a lot of your listeners may have seen that famous follow-up picture of Jesse Marcel kind of kneeling in front of some of the materials. And Roger Ramey is also in that picture, General Ramey. And it's said that Major Marcel indicated along the way that, hey, this stuff that I was in this picture with General Ramey is not the same stuff that I saw the day before, a couple days before, back in New Mexico. Yeah. And so that was the story on that. And Major Marcel took some of those materials after he found. It's been said he took some home and shared it with his family because he thought it was that important. And so by doing that, he created a couple more witnesses who have supported what he said it looked like.
Yeah, it's totally amazing. And nobody has, like I say, with all these UFO cases, Christopher, this is interesting. We don't have, one shred of evidence that we can touch in our hand. I mean, not just from Roswell. And again, this is again for the skeptic side out there in the audience, and maybe those in the jury pool that would later decide and say, no, this is really not believable. The jury decides against and goes with the skeptics. But I find that just totally amazing that of all the incidents around the world, even up to the modern day Tic Tac sightings, these UFOs that look like they go hyperspeed, there's nothing, nobody has one in their garage. And yet, why not? I mean, if all this happened, and many people out there, I'm sure in this audience of the Dr. Sky Experience, believe strongly that we're not alone in this universe. And I don't want to spoil it by giving, substantial information here and facts that there's so many stars out there and many like the sun, so thus we know about exoplanets. That would be wrong of me. But Christopher, we're going to come back with you as we go to the hard break at the bottom of the hour. 1-800-848-9222. A very interesting guest, a practicing attorney, there again in civil cases. Christopher Johnston, his book, Roswell, The Truth on Trial, The Evidence Speaks, You Decide, and you get an official jury summons. More when we come back with these amazing topics here on the Theater of the Mind. Yes, the mysteries in the theater of the mind around us.
The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Dr. Sky Experience.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
I believe there's other forms of intelligence in the universe. I've seen and heard some pretty convincing UFO stuff. Besides, if we're the most intelligent things in the universe, well, that's just depressing. A quote from Rekha Sharma, a very well-known by many people in the philosophy world. Back here at 33 minutes after the hour, ladies and gentlemen, as we move to the top of hour number 1 in completion, a very special guest, author and attorney Christopher Johnston. His book, Roswell, The Truth on Trial, The Evidence Speaks, and You Decide, where you get an official jury summons to be part of the trial process. Christopher, welcome back. And I just wanted to give the audience an idea as we play maybe about a minute of what that radio report was in Roswell after the alleged craft, the so-called UFO, had been either recovered or seen somewhere out in the New Mexico desert.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile, found sometime last week, has been inspected at Roswell, New Mexico, and sent to Wright Field, Ohio, for further inspection. Late this afternoon, a bulletin from New Mexico suggested that the widely publicized mystery of the flying saucers may soon be solved. Army Air Force officers reported that one of the strange discs had been found and inspected sometime last week. Our correspondents in Los Angeles and Chicago have been in contact with Army officials endeavoring to obtain all possible late information. Joe Wilson reports to us now from Chicago.
The Army may be getting to the bottom of all this talk about the so-called flying saucers. As a matter of fact, the 509th Atomic Bomb Group headquarters at Roswell, New Mexico, reports that it has received one of the discs which landed on a ranch outside Roswell. The disc landed at a ranch at Corona, New Mexico, and the rancher turned it over to the Air Force. Rancher W.W. Brizell was the man who discovered the saucer. Colonel William Blanchard of the Roswell Air Base refuses to give details of what the flying disc looks like.
Going back in our time tunnel, that's what it sounded like. Mm-hmm. Christopher Johnston, describe that, because I would imagine if I was out there somewhere listening to that staticky, low-powered radio station, I'd be getting some chills up my spine initially that something of unknown origin was out there in the environs of Roswell. Talk about that. It's just incredible. I mean, for the believer side, there you go.
It is. And no, I really, with the technology we have today, to be able to imagine nothing but relying on, a radio press release like that, it's somewhat unbelievable. And there was also a different time. I mean, you consider our culture, we're right on the heels of World War II, and people tended to be more trusting of the government, more believing of the government, than I think we see a lot of today. So these folks that were hearing that would have absolutely no reason, to question it or anything like that. So it begs the question of, boy, when the retraction came out, the level of, you would imagine the level of confusion would be high, but from what my research showed, it was just taken at face value. Oh, okay, well, they made a mistake. And, Roswell, the Roswell incident, living in this day and age, we all kind of assume it is, it wasn't always the cultural touchstone that it is now. It was, after it happened, a couple years later, things seemed to die down. And then when Stanton Friedman kind of got his hands onto it back in the early 70s, that's when, we really saw interest in, the documentaries and everything else on Roswell really blow up. So, of course, in that time, that created, a 30-year window to lose evidence. And as you said, there is no physical evidence that, folks like you and I have.
Well, I knew Stanton very well, and maybe you've had the honor of meeting him, and you're right. He was electric in this whole conversation, and he brought up so many facts that basically that would be very biased to the jury, because in so many cases, his evidence was, this really happened. And again, the question has to be asked, why the hell doesn't the government ever want to tell us about this? But let's go this way to the callers out there. 1-800-848-9222. Let's say you're not in the jury pool, but you're a believer in this. Give us a call. Tell us why you think that's the case. Or for those that are true deniers, give us some good dialogue that opens up our minds in critical thinking and conversation. We welcome that here on the Dr. Sky Experience. But Christopher, this is kind of fascinating because then the story gets even more bizarre in my mind, that those bodies, if they indeed did happen to capture these bodies, some say that there were 3. Some say that one was alive when found. Others say, and I've read a lot about this, you know a lot about it too, some were deceased. And then they go down the street to a place, which is the 509th Bomb Wing. Well, in case people are not familiar, that's the same bomb group, that dropped the first atomic bomb on Japan. That's interesting. Colonel Tibbets, they all went out of that hangar. I've been in that hangar, spooky place at night with the doors flapping in the wind. And if it all happened, where did they say they took them? Somewhere in Ohio? Is that what the story purports to say?
Right. That's my understanding. And, so Wright Pat in its place in aviation, is one thing, but would you send extraterrestrial bodies there? Now, certainly they have a great hospital there. And in fact, a very close relative of mine was based there for a bunch of years. However, again, with the secrecy, who knows what they're able to do or not do at Wright Pat. But I always thought that was a bit of a strange location for bodies to be sent to. And, of course, that's just my own suspicions. I don't have any proof on that. But I do find it somewhat unusual that everything went to Wright Pat.
Yeah, and your book is getting rave reviews because it's fair and it's unbiased. And that's exactly what it is. If you select jurors, you want to have people that come in there with an open mind to listen to the evidence, as that evidence is, of course, given to them in the summary of the case. And talk a little bit about what the judge is trying to tell people when they're going into a case, like any kind of case. What are the instructions that the judge is actually giving these people that are on the jury, in case somebody has no idea what it's like in a courtroom?
Sure. And a little secret, so, right, the kind of the marching orders that a judge gives are typically referred to as jury instructions. And the jury instructions, they're all codified in just giant books. And they're kind of broken down by case type, say, negligence, right? So there will be, here's your basic negligence instructions, which will tell the jury really what we call the black letter law. Lawyers were all about case law and theory, but there's got to be what is the actual law. And that comes, for the most part, from the jury instructions. So the judge, there's pretrial instructions where he'll tell you, hey, you are the finders of fact, I'm the finder of law, it's your job to listen carefully, kind of the housekeeping stuff. Exactly. But then after the defense rests, if there's nothing else, then the post instructions, those are the ones that really get into this is, the things you're going to be deciding. Here's the parameters of those sorts of things like that. So, and they are standard from trial to trial for the most part, depending on what you're doing. So that's how the jury instructions work.
No, it's very well explained. I'm not an attorney, and I bless, anybody out there who goes into the legal profession. These are things we need to know. And I guess I get 2 things out of this whole episode with you and this wonderful opportunity here on the Dr. Sky Experience to listen to people that know these facts and things. But it's interesting that if you ever have to go into a courtroom situation, the way you're presenting this case, you almost give them the basic idea from the time they'd sit down to be selected as a juror to what they're expected to do based on evidence, pro or con, before the jury reaches its decision, which I find fascinating here. So talk about how this book has been received, and when did it come out, and how do people get in touch with you? That's an equally important question.
Yep. So the book came out March 15th, and it's been received very well. I'm a member of MUFON, the Midwest chapter here, and so I made a lot of them available, to people at meetings and whatnot to get takes. This was more of an educational endeavor for me than some sort of, riches sort of thing. And it's been received surprisingly well. And as you mentioned yourself, we already talked about the fact that people are getting insight into the judiciary is just fantastic in my mind. Easiest way to get in touch with me, it's got two birds with one stone. Easiest way to get the book and the easiest way to get in touch with me. My website is lawgroupofiowa.com. About halfway down on the homepage is a big red button that says buy the book, and it's got a picture of Roswell, the Truth on Trial right next to it, so hard to miss. And then I can also be reached through the website, through any of the contact page. Everything goes directly to me.
Well, that's important because, this is the first time, other than when I mentioned at the top of the program for the first hour, I mentioned a good friend of mine, also an attorney. He did it not in the glamorous way that you're doing. He just kind of got a bunch of people together. He has a prosecutor and he has a defense attorney, and he had a bunch of people that made up a jury who came in. I mean, obviously some of those people had their minds already made up, but was Pluto or is Pluto really a planet? And to many out there, they may think that's the most ridiculous thing they've ever heard of. But I thought it was interesting because it was like you. It's providing us evidence, pro and con, as to why, in this case, Pluto should be a planet and not even be demoted to a dwarf, another interesting subject. But you bring to light so many fascinating things about what actually, according to the records, if you look into all this. So how long did it take you to compile all this? It's a lot of homework.
Yeah, about a year. I can get really obsessive when I get started on something. So I from kind of beginning to end, just over a year. And I would like to point out that the testimony is really twofold. One, I use the testimony to advance the narrative of the story, right? Because I gotta be able to tell the story. Doc, I completely lost my train of thought on that one.
And you know what? I'm going to ask you kindly, Counselor, that we come back after the break here, so you regain everything that you want to tell us in the great way you do. You. And myself to take a breather here just to get a sip of water. And ladies and gentlemen, we'll be right back here on the Dr. Sky Experience. If you're calling in, we got Jim from the Catskills. We'll get you on, and Tony from Clifton, and everybody else at 1-800-848-9222. And if we don't get you to the top of the hour, our second guest, I'm sure, would also welcome that we're going to continue our conversation about the UFO story and why we're never told the truth, in this humble man's opinion. We'll be right back.
The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Dr. Sky Experience.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Hi, this is Dionne Warwick. And what the world needs now is love, sweet love. And you're listening to the Dr. Sky Show.
As we continue 46 minutes after the hour, we love you, Dionne, and thank you as a previous guest. As we continue to talk with our very special guest, author and attorney Christopher Johnston, let's go to the callers. Let's say good morning to Jim from the Catskills. You're on with Chris Johnston. How are you?
Good morning, gentlemen. I want to bring up the famous story about Jackie Gleason with President Nixon. They were good friends.
Yes.
And supposedly, President Nixon took Jackie Gleason to see the alien bodies, and it freaked him out. He couldn't sleep for like a week. And then he became fascinated himself with the idea of UFOs. I think I read somewhere he built a house that looked like a UFO somewhere in Westchester County, New York. Mm-hmm. So one of the guests think of the story with Jackie Gleason seeing the alien bodies.
Jim, you're so right, and I'm glad you mentioned that. Stay with us, and Counselor, you're on.
Yeah, I am about as familiar with that story as the details that Jim just provided. I have heard that as well. And that's another one. I'm glad that one came up because that's an interesting story. You don't hear it that often. And why would Jackie Gleason need to embellish anything of all people? You know,
sure.
There's a certain amount of credibility. You don't hear that one a lot, but parts of it seem to ring true to me.
Well, Jim, you're right. And the story goes that apparently after they were having adult beverages, President Nixon, maybe you know more about this, he actually, allegedly, there wasn't his total security Secret Service detail. and they went over to Homestead Air Force Base as they were both there along the beach there in Miami. And the president drove, his drivers drove them into a building, and he said he wanted to show, Jackie, as you mentioned, these artifacts, alien bodies. And basically Jackie Gleason said, it's nice to have friends in high places that are golf buddies too. But then again, who knows what happened, right, Jim? That's amazing.
I actually had my own UFO experience back in 1982.
Hit us with it. Go ahead. Tell us about it.
Oh, I'm sorry. I lost it for a second. I graduated high school in 1982, and a friend's father owned a big house up in Lake Wallenpaupack up on the lake there. And all the friends were up in the loft, and it was a big skylight there. And we're there just, middle of the night, just watching the sky. And all of a sudden we seen these, I don't remember if it was 4, 5, 6 round glowing aircraft up in the sky. Just up there. Not beams of light, but they were glowing aircraft up in the sky, just hovering up there above the lake. And then all of a sudden, they were, I don't remember how long they were there, 5, 10 minutes or whatever. And all of a sudden they just all took off. And they were around. They weren't helicopters. There was no drones back then. And I've read other reports where people have witnessed that same thing.
I appreciate you testifying here, Jim. That's fascinating. I wish we had more time, but we used to vacation and go up in summers to Lake Wallenpaupack. I'll never forget it. But what your sightings, you'll always remember that. And I appreciate you calling the Dr. Sky Experience. Hope you'll become a regular to this particular archive. Thank you for being with us. Let's say good morning to Tony in Clifton. Tony, you're on with attorney and author Christopher Johnston. How are you?
Hello, Dr. Sky. Hello, Christopher. Thank you for taking my call. Thank you.
Our pleasure.
I love the concept of the book and the trial. One of the questions I have, and I'll just leave you with that, and then I'll stop talking, because I could talk all the time when I call Dr. Sky. But one of the questions I have was about the witness who was, he was the witness whose name was Jesse Marcel, who was an Air Force officer. And I want you to just mention to us, I'm looking forward to reading the book. I want you to mention to us who are the witnesses and, and the testimonies, because obviously they're all gone now. Is anyone still alive? And does your book talk about Jesse Marcel, the Air Force officer, who said, okay, great, thank you. I look forward to your response. Thanks.
Thank you, Tony. Appreciate it.
Sure. Well, first, none of the witnesses that I included are alive, and that was by design. You start running into issues. So,
yeah, exactly.
As far as legality. So I used only witnesses who are already deceased. I did, of course, include Major Jesse Marcel as one of, probably one of the most important witnesses, to the whole thing. He's what I would call a pretty clean witness. So you got to remember, I wrote the direct exam and the cross exam on this. So what I did on cross, he told his story. But then the issue at the press conference, when he came out later, this whole, it was different stuff at the press conference, but, I was following orders, so I didn't say anything. So when I had him on the stand in the book, and then you come back on cross, for a guy who's so about following orders, I bet the orders didn't include taking some of this to your house. Right. But other than that, there is not a whole lot, to undermine Major Marcel. I made some hay, as lawyers will do, regarding rank. General Ramey, he's a general, and he said this, and you're just a major, and you said that, But again, how much weight's the jury going to give it? But you use what you have.
Moving to the top of the hour. Thank you, Tony in Clifton. We move on to Joseph in Manhattan. Good morning. How are you? And thanks for being part of the dialogue.
There's UFOs over New York, and I ain't too surprised.
You better believe it. They're all over the place. That's exactly right, Joseph. More and more people are seeing it. Let's go back in our time tunnel here. Back in October and November, back in the East Coast. I need not remind many of the folks listening, of course, directly out of the powerful signal of 77 WABC, seeing drones and other strange objects in the heavens. That's totally incredible. And this is interesting as we talk about it, Christopher. That never got any kind of clarification, right? That's still out there as a mystery.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Nothing. My estimation maybe is being here in the Midwest, but virtually nothing came out about that. And what I find most amazing is we all will remember there was an administration change in the middle of there, and we still didn't find out anything.
Exactly. And the president...
That's a weird one.
Right. And President Trump has said, I gather he said basically that there's probably, and I don't use the quotation because I don't have it, that there's really nothing to worry about it. There were research things going on, but what are those things? That is bizarre. Let's go to the top of the hour and say good morning as we go to the great state of Maine. Good morning, Frank. You're on the Dr. Sky Experience. How are you?
Oh, good morning, Dr. Sky. Always a pleasure whenever I get the chance to speak to you, and your guest today is fascinating, Christopher, the lawyer. My question is, well, it's first a statement and then a question. I'm noticing that every time a UFO story or a story about Area 51 or a story about anything that is like the fascinating topics that we talk about on this program, that you talk about on this program, the Pentagon will come out and say a totally different story and go into a reverse and a psychological reverse mode. Like I read an article. I don't know if you've seen it, Dr. Sky, but I read an article about Area 51 that the Pentagon said it was a total lie.
Absolutely. I read it from the Wall Street Journal. That's where it was, Frank. The Wall Street Journal. You bet.
Absolutely. And my question is, and I want to direct this to Christopher, the lawyer, how would you deal with that? I mean, if I was on a jury and you got somebody from the Pentagon that said, well, you know, that crash site or that thing that happened in Heckelberg, I believe, Heckenberg, Pennsylvania, or the UFO that was seen in Texas, Steubenville, I believe, Texas.
Correct.
Or the one that was seen up in Loring in my state of Maine, or the one that was the Exeter UFO that was seen, any one of those. How would you counteract that? I mean, you have somebody from the Pentagon who obviously is not going to purge themselves, but they're going to twist the truth so much that you won't know what's going on.
Thank you, Frank. Yeah, I want to, just as we run out of time, I just want Christopher to respond, but I appreciate you, my friend, being up in the beautiful state of Maine. I hope your skies are clear because you have some great things to see up there without the light pollution that many of us have. Christopher, as a response back to Frank. Frank, thanks for being with us.
Sure. I think a guy's best approach in something like that, and again, with sort of an off-the-cuff question, I would start establishing a pattern of behavior. So as you know, the articles came a couple weeks ago, and they acknowledged disinformation programs in the past, right? So I would go after, if your listeners remember, like COINTELPRO, right, or Operation Chaos, and start showing, you might be a Pentagon guy, and you're up here and you're saying this, but we can absolutely can prove that the Pentagon has a pattern of this sort of behavior. Granted, I can't prove it in this case, but you've done it before. That would be the approach I'd take.
Well, I appreciate it. And one more time, please give us before the clock runs out here. We certainly want to hear how do people get in touch with you. And I always appreciate this. Hopefully you'll come back with us as we can analyze these subjects in greater detail in the future.
Oh, I would love to. Thank you. And again, best way to get me and to get the book, loggroupofiowa.com. Homepage, big red button to buy the book. And if you want to learn more about me, my bio's there, and there's some pieces of some space law work on my website as well. So
you're awesome.
Space stuff to see. Yep.
Thank you, Christopher, for being with us and staying up late with us. He's the author of Roswell, The Truth on Trial. The evidence speaks. You decide. Wherever good books are sold. We'll join with you again, I'm sure. Peace and happiness and clear skies. Thank you. And folks, as we go to the top of the hour, I just wanted to mention from the world of the sky, because everybody says to me and in the emails, tell us what we can see. Did you know, ladies and gentlemen, a new nova has exploded in the heavens, albeit mighty faint. More southern latitude observers might get to see it. Nothing on the scale of something super bright. This particular object is known as 2025 Nova Lupi. What the heck is that? From the constellation Lupus the Wolf. Goes back into ancient antiquity when they thought the mad wolf. That's what it was, half man, half wolf. Yes, a constellation in the heavens that was speared by the great Centaurus, if you look at mythology of the sky. In the same region of the sky, how about this? An event that none of us saw back in the year 1006 AD. A supernova in almost the exact spot in the heavens. I looked at this little nova the other night, but the one back in 1006 AD was the brightest supernova. It was visible well beyond that of the naked eye and cast shadows. Much more when we come back in hour number 2 here on the Dr. Sky Experience. Stay tuned. On the other side of this break with our very special guest, Dan Harari. He's talking about things. He knows the UFO subject, and he knows a lot of people that are connected to it. And we'll be right back after these important announcements.
The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Dr. Sky Experience.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
The evidence points to the fact that Roswell was a real incident, and that indeed an alien craft did crash, and that material was recovered from that site. We all know that UFOs are real. All we need to ask is where do they come from, and what do they want? A quote from the sixth man on the moon, Dr. Edgar Mitchell of Apollo 14. 33 minutes after the hour, we welcome you back, ladies and gentlemen. The hotline number here, if you'd like to join us in this dialogue. Questions and comments to our special guest, Dan Harari. He's a man, of course, of many talents, talking about ufology and other things like the wildsignal.news. Welcome back, Dan. This is a fascinating time, and I wanted to get into your analysis of, we kind of answered why we're not hearing the truth, back from the Truman days. But your analysis on some of these things that the people, particularly in the East Coast, where the primary audience is right now, and now, of course, growing all over the world with WABC. What are your analysis? What do you say about what people were seeing over here in the East Coast, drones and whatever, etc.?
Okay. Well, my mother, God bless her, my mother's 91. She lives in Toms River, New Jersey. Mm-hmm. I don't think she's listening now. I'm sure she's sleeping. But she was calling me, Danny, the drones. I hope they don't attack me, the drones. I go, Mom, I'm sure. Mom, you're 91. You're in a wheelchair. I think you'll be okay, Mom. You know.
Oh, blessings.
Here's what my very dear friend Stephen Bassett says about that event, and I believe that this is what happened. An extraterrestrial, it's called a flap, when many ET craft or orbs or lights are suddenly over any one city at one time, it's called a flap. You know this, Dr. Scott. So yes. Stephen Bassett, my partner in Hollywood Disclosure Lines, he said it was a huge ET flap that was happening over the East Coast at the tail end of last year. So our U.S. military knew they were ET orbs or craft or lights, whatever they were, and our U.S. military, the geniuses over there, said, look, we can't let the world know that ETs exist. Our heads will explode. We can't let anybody know because we have to keep the truth embargo going. What did they do? They sent up American military man-made drones across the East Coast, huge, they were all military man-made American drones. Why? To deflect from the fact that there were hundreds of ET orbs and lights and things floating around. A magician on a stage, goes, ladies and gentlemen, look at my right hand. Look at my right hand. This and this. The magician's doing this trick in his left hand behind his back.
Wow.
Steve Bassett nailed this. And Steve Bassett said, the military sent up these drones to deflect the fact that real ET craft and orbs were really there from other worlds, other lands, other dimensions, whatever they're from, and we had to deflect. President Biden and President Trump, both their spokespeople, both said, oh, everything's fine, they're just drones. They had FAA clearances, drones. They never And then there was rumors they were Russian, they were Chinese, they were North Korean. Of course not. Of course not. They were
this goes back a long time.
Drones,
right.
And they were there to deflect from an ET flap. That's what happened. I absolutely believe that to be true.
Well, that's an interesting revelation because we've listened to so many people, not only in this archive. I try to do as much research like many people out there, and you're the first person to tell us a more detailed explanation of this, which begs the question, what and where are those things that are of the ET origin? And that becomes even more bizarre. Let me go back in my time tunnel here. We had a gentleman, Captain Salas, from the Air Force.
He's a good friend of mine.
Yeah, and well, you know the story, but I'll just briefly say it, and I'd love your comment on this. Back in March of '67, I believe, at Malmstrom Air Force Base, he's a captain. Right. His MPs are frantically calling him on the radio saying, "Oh, wow," but what were they all wowing? They were looking at this blue orb, supposedly.
No, orange.
Okay, correct me there. Floating what? Over the nuclear missile silos, a whole flight of missile silos. Carry on the story because that's another strange incident that I never heard any qualification on. Go ahead, please.
Okay, so Captain Robert Salas, Bob Salas, dear friend of mine, he's on the board of directors of my group, Hollywood Disclosure Alliance. He and his partner were in the bunker there. They oversaw 10 ICBM nuclear missiles. Mm-hmm. They get frantic calls, like you said, Dr. Sky, from above, from the Army guys at the gate above. They said there's a huge orange and red light that's hovering above the base. What do we do? What do we do? Well, what happened was all 10 of Bob Salas's nuclear missiles went off. They were turned off. Bob Salas said it wasn't possible. It's not possible. He couldn't have done it. And he was there at the controls. He said he couldn't even have done it. No one on the planet Earth could have done it. This orange light thing, whatever it was, did it. Okay, so they turned him off. Bob Salas goes home that night, gets a few hours sleep, comes back to the base the next morning. He and all the men involved are ushered into a room. They're told, none of you will ever tell the story to anyone, including your wives, as long as you live. You are not allowed to ever tell. This event did not happen. You are never to tell anyone. That was 1967, like you said, Dr. Scott.
Exactly.
30 years later, in the late 90s, Bob Salas thought, you know what? Before I pass away, I'm going to share this news with the world. He's a hero. He was brave enough to come forward. Steve Bassett and Danny Sheehan are trying to get Bob Salas to testify before Congress. Bob Salas is what they call a nuclear witness. There's two other gentlemen like him, elderly gentlemen who went through the same thing in the 60s and 70s. There's two other men. There are three men who are alive still. And they're trying to testify before Congress, Representative Luna and the other people who have been doing the UAP hearings before they pass away. Bob Salas is like 83, 84 years old. He's not a spring chicken.
Well, I was honored to have him, Dan, on my program years ago, and I appreciate the clarification here, because fated giant is the topic, as you know. The name fated giant, ladies and gentlemen, comes from the fact when a nuclear missile or a group of missiles inexplicably goes offline, they call it in the military jargon a fated giant. So I hope he does testify. God bless him. I hope he lives to 183 to tell us the story.
Me too. And again, Steve Bassett and Danny Sheehan are trying very hard to have him and the two other gentlemen. They all spoke at Contact in the Desert, by the way. But
see, I missed it. I hope I can make it.
Yeah. The nuclear witnesses. Also, I just recently saw a documentary about Russia UAPs, and this happened in the 60s and 70s in Russia as well. There was an event where UAP shut down a Russian nuclear arsenal as well. So what are they saying? That the ETs are trying to tell us, humans, don't be stupid, don't blow up your planet, you have a beautiful planet, get rid of your nukes, do not use your nuclear weapons. That's what they're saying.
Well, they must be excited right now, not to change the subject on you and the listeners, but the world is on, high alert here as to whether or not this particular President Donald Trump, will go ahead and do his best to take out the Iranian nuclear capability to develop nuclear weapons. We don't know what will happen. But you're so right. I mentioned in the first hour that these sightings come about in this kind of interesting area after July of 45 when we detonate the first, Oppenheimer bomb, as we call it, in the plains of New Mexico. And then after that, and my professor in school was Tombaugh, who discovered Pluto. And he told me a story before he passed. He said, I was out there that morning of July 16th, just looking from Las Cruces up into the sky, and I see this brighter than the sun at 5:40 a.m. in the morning. And then after that, right, Dan, we're starting to see a number of these strange sightings. So they must not want us to have nukes, correct?
Well, absolutely correct, everything you said. And I'll add this, and I just found out about this recently. There's a book called Trinity by Jacques Vallée and Paolo Harris.
Okay.
And Trinity, the book, is about a UFO crash 1 month after, if you called it the Oppenheimer test. It was the Trinity. It was Trinity.
Right, Trinity test. Right.
It was a few months before the two bombs that fell over Japan. It was a full-on atomic blast. 1 month later, Dr. Sky, a small UFO crashed in nearby. 2 young Native American Indian boys were riding their horses, and they saw the crash, and they saw the little people inside scrambling and screaming in pain and crying, and they saw this. One was 7 and one was 9, and they kept this information from the world for years and years and years.
Damn,
so
that's
Jacques
amazing.
Vallée and Paolo Harris wrote a book. They interviewed these 2 men before they passed away, and it was a month after the very first test. So, and then you could proceed the tests. You know, the Foo Fighters were in 1943 and 44.
Correct.
World War II. The Foo Fighters were orange balls of lights that followed American planes and German planes over Europe, and followed American and Japanese planes over the Pacific Theater. The Foo Fighters were a global phenomenon. Then there was the Battle of Los Angeles, February 1942. A huge UFO was flying above Santa Monica Beach, which I love that story, and they shot like 10,000 shells at it, and it just vanished. It just went away.
Well, we got to do this again with you, Dan. I know we're coming up on a break here in just a moment, but no, not to cut you short. It's fascinating, and there are callers that are going to come on here. We'd like to welcome them.
Sure, I'd love call. I did just recently. Let me throw this in. Just recently, I heard about the Magenta crash in 1933 in Italy. And I have friends who are making a documentary as we speak, Dr. Sky, about the Magenta crash. They're trying to get information out of the Vatican, because the Vatican and Mussolini were involved with that crash.
Amazing stuff, ladies and gentlemen. So much more here as we almost go to the break here, but we want to give out some information. Our special guest, Dan Harari, the contact number here, 1-800-848-9222, as we move to the top of the hour. And ladies and gentlemen, he's talking about so many things. We'll get into more of the things that Dan is available for the people listening. The wowsignal.news is just one, a news service out there. That's a compilation of all these different sources of information that come in, kind of a place where the people in this industry, and you and I, who are fascinated by this particular subject. And what is the subject? Other worldly craft, intelligence in the universe. And from the astronomical side, I need not say it, but I guess I will, with the plethora of star systems, right, Dan, that we've discovered that now have exoplanets since 1995, the first exoplanet discovered around a star called 51 Pegasi. Now we see thousands and thousands of planetary objects around star systems. And if there are many like the Earth, why couldn't they have some type of life? But we'll be right back with our very special guest, Dan Harari, as we move toward the top of our second hour on the Dr. Sky Experience.
The Dr. Sky Experience.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, 47 minutes after the hour. Dan Harari is our special guest as we move toward the top of this second hour. Let's say good morning to many of the people that have been on hold here. Good morning, Pete in Staten Island. Your concerns, questions, comments, and a dialogue. How are you? Pete, are you with us? I guess we're going to move on from Pete. Let's go to Phil in New York. Good morning, Phil. You're on the line. Say good morning. Let's try Paul from New York as you're on with Dan Harari. Good morning to you.
Hello, Dr. Sky.
Hello, sir.
I would like to ask your guest a question. What is his thoughts regarding the U.S. Navy being involved with what's called the Roswell incident in 1947?
Go ahead, Dan. Dan, are you with us?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, no. We just talked about the Roswell incident, Paul, but the Navy and the Roswell incident is apples and oranges. I'm not sure. It was the Army Air Force that was involved with the Roswell incident, not the Navy.
UFO story had been a cover-up for a scandal that was even bigger, that involved infighting between the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Air Force, U.S. Army at the core, U.S. Army Air Corps at the time over the possession of nuclear weapons, atomic bombs, I should say.
Dr. Sky, you got to help me out, brother.
Well, it's interesting. I really, I'm always honest with the audience, too. I'm not really sure about this. Say that again so I can hear you. There's a little bit of a disconnect in our lines here. Go ahead, please. To tell me what you were asking one more time so I can hear it.
Well, basically, at the time of Roswell, the U.S. Navy and the Army, and basically the War Department, were fighting over who was going to control atomic weapons, the Army or the Navy. At the time, it was the Army. The Navy was left out. So the Navy, trying to show up the Army, tried to show how insecure.
Well, I guess we're getting
something.
Okay. I appreciate your call, but I only heard a little bit of it, so in the interest of all the listeners out there, I can tell you this much. I really don't know the details of that. I'm always honest. Just like Dan is saying, that's a little difficult for us to, since we really don't know. I'm going to take your word if you're telling me, what were you saying, that the Navy was really trying to get this and the Army, they were fighting the Army? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes. Look at what happened after Roswell. They came to a peace deal between the Navy and the Army and control of atomic weapons, that the Navy was granted permission to start developing
Okay. I do apologize. I'm sorry. We're getting... No, Dan, go ahead. I'm sorry. We're getting a lot of disconnect on both sides of the conversation, so go ahead, please.
Okay. I'm not sure exactly where that gentleman was going, but I will add this.
Right.
There was a memo uncovered from J. Edgar Hoover that I think he was writing, God, who was he writing to? Maybe the president, about he and the FBI were being denied access to the craft that was discovered at Roswell. He said we were being denied access to the disk. And that's a letter from J. Edgar Hoover. So the FBI and Hoover had interest in 47 of the Roswell crash. But where that gentleman was going, Dr. Scott, I couldn't really tell you.
No, I apologize to the audience. A disconnect on both sides doesn't get an answer because we didn't really hear the question. But let me ask our helmsman, Tony, do we have anyone else on the line? Because I thought we had a little disconnect in trying to hear who's waiting in the queue. Is there anybody else that we didn't get to? Okay. I appreciate that. Thank you, Tony. And just know, ladies and gentlemen, the folks that are behind this show, thank God for Tony, navigating this powerful signal out into space, as we say. But let's continue here. There's some other things that you want to mention, and we're obviously almost out of time, but never no time at all. Talk about this. You're the chairman of the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance. You've got a book out. This is fascinating. And let's talk about those, too, as we go to the top of the hour. And then simply, Dan, how do we get in touch with you?
Okay, great. Well, thank you again very much. So the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance I created 2 years ago. It's a networking group. We have 210 members now around the world. Half of our members, Dr. Sky, are UAP and ET experiencers, researchers, and disclosure advocates like my partner Steve Bassett. The other half are Hollywood writers, producers, directors, and performers like my friend Dee Wallace, like my friend movie star Thomas Jane, like Shirley MacLaine, who was on your message a minute ago on your show. And when we say Hollywood, it means the global entertainment industry. Our goal is to help these two groups merge and network together to inspire and nurture the next era of feature films, TV shows, and documentaries based on real-life experiences of real-life people. That's the goal. I'm the chairman. My daughter and myself and Steve Bassett, we run the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance.org. Please go visit us, and if you want to join, it tells you how to join. HollywoodDisclosureAlliance.org. We have members all over the world. I get emails all the time from experiencers, Dr. Sky. Some of the stories, probably you too. Some of the emails I get are just mind-blowing, you know?
Oh, I know. I mean, and we certainly, let me say this to everybody listening out there. Certainly, we don't have all the answers. Obviously, that's where we go to guests like Dan and others that you hear. And I always say this humbly, and people look at me and say, why you keep saying that? And I say, it's not always about the host. It's about the great guest, because if I knew all this stuff, I wouldn't have guests, right? So there you go. So just trying to show a little humility in the face of trying to, I look at this role as being like an air traffic controller, or if you want to talk about the future, the spacecraft navigator. So we're trying to bring everything together and give everybody a chance to land and take off and be safe in doing it. I think that's a good analogy. But this
Absolutely.
is fascinating.
I'm a natural-born gatherer together of people. People have been telling me this for years. In the last 2 years, I've brought hundreds of people together that never met each other, never normally would have met each other, because I'm so fascinated by experiencer stories. I'm fascinated by friends I have like Paul Hynek and Steve Bassett and Richard Dolan and Nick Pope. These guys are my friends, like literally my friends. And these are the brilliant geniuses. I call myself a 20-year student of ufology. I've been studying ufology for 20 years. Dr. Scott, I know a teeny little bit of baby amount. This is the biggest subject, I think, in the history of mankind, and I know a teeny little sliver. So I love meeting, new people, people like you, media people, podcasters. The more people I meet, the more information I get. And I'm fascinated by this topic overall,
It's interesting. Back in school, I remember what a college radio station, without naming it, back on the East Coast, we did the basic broadcast. We thought we were big rock stars because, we could be heard on campus. But the truth is, I actually had somebody set up an interview with Dr. J. Allen Hynek. If you're not familiar, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
If you look at Close Encounters of the Third Kind, he makes a cameo appearance toward the end. And also Betty Hill. I actually visited with her of the UFO experience of abduction. And not to try to top what you're saying, it's just that this has been a passion of mine. But we always go to great guests like yourself who talk about this. But I got to ask you the last question as we go to the top of the hour here. Your opinion, Dan Harari, of the Tic Tac incidents that are being seen around the world today, most bizarre, your analysis briefly, if you can.
Well, the big picture is I believe there are two disparate groups within and I hate to say the dark government or the dark military, but Harry Truman created the Majestic 12 group to cover up Roswell and all future UFO events. In my opinion, their sons and their grandsons and their great-grandsons, now it's 80 years later, whoever runs the UFO secrets for the U.S. military and the U.S. government, and it's not President Trump, it's no president that's ever lived, ever. It's other than FDR, Truman, and maybe Eisenhower and Kennedy. Those guys were involved with the UAP information. But after that, it went to this black group. They're throwing breadcrumbs, Dr. Sky. Every now and then they'll release a video. Oh, here, Lou Elizondo. Here, David Grush. Here's a video. Here's a still photo of a disc. Here's this. It's little breadcrumbs to just a little taste. They have a wealth of information. They have 80 years of craft. My father reverse engineered craft for the Army. We didn't even get to my father. That's a whole nother story.
Well, we'll have to do it again, right? We'll have to do this again as time goes on.
But yeah, they're throwing, the Tic Tac videos. I mean, either they're extremely advanced projects that the U.S. military is not sharing with the world, or they're from outer space, or they're from the future, or they're interdimensional. There's so many different theories. I love that aliens are from the future. That's my personal favorite one.
Well, here's one quickie before we run out of time. I've thought this, and I should write a book on this, and maybe you and I can corroborate on this, and I'll give you my honest opinion, and the listeners here while we wrap it up. I think this experience of Tic Tac is something from the future. I say, according to the great physicist, that gravity is the warpage of space-time. And where did humans begin? They began in caves. Where would we go if the world ended? Nuclear war, asteroidal impact, viral this and that, blah, blah, blah. Famines, people go back underground. Well, what they can't do, or what's happening, is AI seemingly taking over, but it doesn't have a body. So maybe since AI might understand quantum physics better than us, the bonding of the human, meaning biologically, with something from AI that can travel interdimensionally through time and space. How about that one as we move into an early morning show? How about that? That's incredible?
Terrific. That's great. I saw a UFO 1 year ago at Contact in the Desert. It was half technology, half octopus. I swear on my daughter's life, that's a true story. I saw a UFO that was half octopus. It was alive. This thing was alive, man. It had a heartbeat. And I'm thinking AI and biologics have melded into the future somehow.
And maybe octopi, the thing that calamari comes from, they may be extraterrestrial in origin because they know how to think. That's amazing.
Right. Octopi are unique on the planet Earth. That's exactly what, nobody knows where they came from. That's right. That's correct.
Well, you're a brother of mine, and obviously by this indoctrination with the audience, we hope everybody's enjoyed the Dr. Sky experience. More in less than 24 hours, and thanking Tony, our navigator of the powerhouse of Talk Radio 77 WABC, to hear it so everybody can hear it as good as you would expect. Dan, I appreciate your time and look forward to doing that. One of the websites we mentioned is wowsignal.news. And you mentioned Hollywood Disclosure Alliance. What was that? A dot what? What is that?
That's .org. HollywoodDisclosureAlliance.org. TheWowSignal.news. And if you want to see my books, DanHarariAuthor.com. DanHarariAuthor.com.
Thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Clear skies, health, and happiness as we join ourselves together already talking about the theater of the mind, theater of the mysteries around us. Thank you for your time. We'll see you in our next edition in less than 24 hours.
Thanks for listening to the Dr. Sky Experience. You can hear the Dr. Sky Experience Saturday mornings, midnight to 2 a.m. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode so you never have to wonder,
what the heck is going on here?
Ready to make a real impact every day? Join the Active Day Home Care team and help clients maintain their independence in the comfort of their own homes. Make a difference in someone's life as you provide essential daily assistance and protect their health and happiness. Earn up to $20 an hour and enjoy additional perks like optional daily pay, 401k, paid time off, ongoing educational training, and more. Join a team that values care, compassion, and your professional growth. Visit ActiveDay.com to apply.